It's so good to see so many people here. My name is Gertie Boschma, and I'm part of the faculty of the School of Nursing. And it is my honor and my pleasure to welcome you to this very special event. We always feel the Nursing History Symposium is special, but this year it's even more special because we are celebrating 100 years of academic nursing at UBC. I think that's an applause. And so we are typically hosting the Nursing History Symposium through the UBC Consortium of Nursing History Inquiry. And this very special panel, we do even bigger. We invite the whole school, and we have another large group of friends of the school around. And so for this special occasion, I would like to call our director, Elizabeth UVic, to have the opening address.
Thank you, Gertje, and welcome everyone. I will be very brief. As you can tell, I have a bit of a head cold, and in fact, I will be spending my time in the very back of the room in an attempt not to infect anyone. I would like to start today by acknowledging the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people on which this symposium is taking place, and thank them for the privilege of the university and our academic learning taking place here. I would also like to follow up, Gertje, with the celebration. This is our centenary year, and it is truly exciting to recognize that this is the oldest baccalaureate nursing degree program, not just in Canada, but in what was 100 years ago, the British Empire, now the Commonwealth countries. There's only 4 other universities, all in our neighbor to the south, that predate the beginning of our education here as a baccalaureate program, adding to the wonderful tradition of hospitals, of nursing education in hospitals that goes back to Florence Nightingale. And so it's particularly meaningful that this year the focus of the symposium is nursing education and the 100 years of academic nursing that we helped get started with that visionary Ethel Johns. So welcome to the day. I'm really looking forward to the variety of discussion and presentations, including our keynote, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. And then I would like to add a few brief introductory comments, as well as to give a bit of context to the day. We focus in particularly, as Elizabeth said, on the history of nursing education and the role of the school in shaping nursing education and programs, provincially and nationally. And so we will celebrate, really. But also, we want to create a place where we want to give a serious look at the past as well as to the future of nursing education. And so we will offer a keynote address and a series of panel presenters who will speak and explore change in educational programs and nursing knowledge, whether from historical or current day perspectives. And we really anticipate that our program will provide ample opportunity for discussion and reflection. I know that for some we talk about the events as if it is history, and for others in the room it's like lived experience. And so we are really anticipating that people will speak to whatever positions we might propose on the developments of the school, might come with various responses, and we are really interested in all of those. And that is in part because a look at the past is, as we believe, always a good opportunity to reflect on the changes that we're caught up in today. And so to have a sense of that complexity will, I think, fit with what the history of the school is all about. So Elizabeth already acknowledged that we are guests today on the land of the Musqueam people. And so we are thankful for that opportunity. And I would also like to recognize the major help that we have. We are not only in a beautiful place, just even today being here is a privilege, but we have also had a lot of help from staff, students, and the wider UBC staff involved with making today's event happen. And so we really could not have done that without you. I also would like to thank the Steering and Advisory Committee for their ongoing support and many alumni and members of the BC History of Nursing Society, who you will see a beautiful display table of as well, who are our steadfast supporters. I also want to draw attention to the other display tables from the BC History of Nursing Society already mentioned, and the library. Thanks, Catherine, for being here, the UBC Press, and our alumni office. So really take a look when you have a chance. And then to sort of pause one moment at the opening of this special symposium, I would like to make a special acknowledgement to Helen Shore. She is the patron of our consortium, and due to her generous support, we are not only able to make the Consortium of Nursing History Inquiry a useful place, but also we are particularly grateful because she made an additional donation to make this day possible in this particular place. So I would think that's another applause. Helen was not able to be here in person, but we certainly will make sure that she gets a full report of our today's event. And so that concludes my introductory comments. And then now it's my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker. We will actually, after our keynote speaker is finished and we have had another chance to have a coffee, we'll have the panel discussion that will be facilitated by Kathy O'Flynn, who is part of our faculty. And then she will introduce the panel members. So I will now introduce Dr. Susan Duncan. Because of the keynote address, we are so happy you're here, Susan. She is a professor and director of the University of Victoria School of Nursing, and we are very proud to have her speak to us today. Not only because of that fact, but also because she is an alumni of our UBC School of Nursing. When I let the consortium patron Helen Shore know that we plan to invite Susan Duncan, she said, "Susan? Yes, I know her. I taught her. She was in my class." So that was just setting the tone. After obtaining your master's degree at UBC, Susan then moved on to obtain a PhD from the University of Alberta, during which she wrote an influential and widely cited history of public health nursing in Canada. Students always are interested to read it, and since that time, which has now been quite some time, Susan has presented and published numerous articles, research reports, chapters on community mental health nursing, public health, and primary health care. But in addition, Susan is also a renowned and trusted leader and advocate for nursing education, provincially and nationally. You are a leading scholar in nurse regulation and health policy research, and one of the founding members and then president of the ARN-BC, which is now evolving into the Nurses and Nurse Practitioners of BC. Susan served on the board of directors of the CNA, the Canadian Association of School of Nursing, and an appointed member of the CASN Task Force on Public Health, Nursing Competencies and Educational Resources. So that sort of depicts the range of scholarship Susan is engaged with. But you always let your leadership and scholarship in nursing education inform by your historical work on nursing and health. And we know you're never hesitant to ask the critical questions to move us forward. Therefore, we are most fortunate You're speaking today and start us off on the most relevant critical question. 100 years of university nursing education. Looking back and looking forward. Why then? Why not now? Please welcome Susan Duncan.
Wow. Well, good morning, everyone. And I'd like to begin by also expressing my gratitude for being here with all of you this morning on the traditional lands of the Musqueam people, and to be inspired by the history, the values, and the traditions of the people, their teachings, and as we move forward in nursing education and our discussions. So this is truly a pleasure to look around this room and see so many colleagues from the past, quite a lengthy past, I might add, and it's just, it's such a beautiful venue. So it's such a privilege, and thank you very much, Geertje, for that very generous introduction. So I'd like to begin with some congratulations, first of all, to all of you in the UBC School of Nursing and to the BC Nursing History Group for this wonderful commemorative plaque that was unveiled on February 26th. And this is such a significant acknowledgement of the leadership and contribution to the contributions of Ethel Johns, which is truly amazing. And actually, when I arrived yesterday, Geertje took me to see the plaque, where it is just outside of the School of Nursing, and in a beautiful spot with the foliage, and it was very moving to see it. So the UBC School of Nursing is, as Geertje and others have mentioned already this morning, such a significant school of nursing in our world, and a leader. And so we're very fortunate to have the archival resources that we have through the UBC archives, a tremendous resource, as well as the scholarly, exceptionally scholarly works of Glenys Silm and Ethel Warbenuk, Sheila Rankin-Zur, Geertje, Margaret Skaya, and others who have really developed the history, and we have those resources that I draw on frequently in my research, my writing, my teaching. And I just want to also say that in addressing you today, I do situate myself as a proud alumni of the school. I did my master's here in the 80s with other colleagues who are in the room. And this is the place, the base, where I established my passion and work in teaching and nursing education, leadership, and policy. And I think it is a school that has inspired so many of us in this direction and continues to do so. So I have to say my interest in Ethel Johns and the history of the School of UBC Nursing began with a conversation with Dr. Shirley Stitz at the U of A in 1977 when I was taking her Trends and Issues course. And one of the assignments was to research a famous nurse. And I really didn't know anything about anybody at the time, but I selected Ethel Johns. And when I mentioned it to Shirley Stinson, she said, "Oh, you must phone Margaret Street at UBC and talk to her because she's just finished the biography." And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to phone Margaret Street at UBC, and but I did. And Margaret Street was very, very happy to talk to me, a fourth-year undergraduate student, and was very passionate about describing her journey and researching watchfires on the mountain, and very generous in her reflections, both on Ethel Johns, but also what it was like to engage in that level of rigorous historical research. And so I've returned to that reading often for inspiration. My focus for this particular address this morning is based on a conversation that I had with Geertje last November, and she really is the inspiration for this looking back and looking forward, and also, motivating me to be somewhat critical this morning in my comments, as she knows I am inclined to do. So I really appreciate this privilege of being here and being able to do that, and to focus in particular on nursing education, looking back and looking forward. But Geertje also mentioned to look at public health nursing as as my field of practice, nursing practice and teaching, but also recognizing, of course, all the nursing practice areas are equally significant, but public health as being the area that prompted us into the university in the first place. So what I'd like to do is, in exploring this question, why then and why not now, is to look at some themes around knowledge required for nursing practice then and as it evolved. Our understandings of knowledge has evolved over the years. Leadership for the profession and the discipline, including our relationships with individuals and organizations. And of course, we see the web of relationships in this room. It's quite a significant factor. And also exploring the theme of social accountability and that why then, why not now? What did society and what do people need from nursing now relative to health needs and aspirations? So I'll take the opportunity to touch down on some key points over the last century as markers on our progress, and also to gauge some of the current and future issues. Sonia Greipma, another BC nurse historian and who is now president of CASN, in a recent article described history as a safe place to explore sensitive topics, including our skeletons in the closet. So in this spirit, I would like to provoke some awareness of pressing critical issues in our profession and our discipline in nursing education, while also finding that balance in affirming, of course, the celebration that's due here today for all of the contributions of Canadian nursing and this School of Nursing over the past century. I will be weaving a little bit through past and present and leadership and accountability and knowledge, so I hope that it'll work for you. It's not exactly a linear progression through the material. So just beginning with John's famous cradle to the grave speech, I think it best exemplifies the vision and the rationale for the breadth and the depth of a university preparation for nurses. That was the vision of the time. At the time, she reflected, quote, "There is no avocation, not even nursing, or not even medicine itself, which transcends ours in the intimate association with life." So reflecting on the forces and the people at the time who inspired the move for university education here at UBC, referred to later by Ethel Johns as, quote, "the experiment," one can see the patterns that these early leaders held a broad view of health and, in fact, the determinants of health. Johns herself had been a member of the Manitoba Public Welfare Commission and had advocated for public programs and universal health and social programs. So she became well known as a health and policy leader and across the country. And within her roles, speaking broadly about health and social issues, she also took every opportunity she could to advocate for university nursing education. So these are our roots. Relationships and partnerships were important at the time as collaborations occurred within public health, medicine, and university administrators. They came together and they all worked to make this happen, this conviction for university nursing education. So it was those relationships and coalitions with medicine, not organized medicine per se, but certain leaders in medicine were very keen to see nursing move into the university. And you know, it's interesting that nursing was one of the first disciplines to move into this university. It wasn't until the 50s that medicine actually became a faculty within the university. I was actually quite struck with that. I just discovered that. It was quite a realization. So turning to public health nursing, of course there were many things going on that spurred the requirement for public health nurses and for public health nurses to have an education in the university. And the Spanish flu of 1918 was, of course, was one of these. and public health departments were being established as we speak. The first one here in British Columbia was in Saanich on the island. And Dr. Henry Essen Young, and I'm sure a name known to most of you, was the first provincial health minister, provincial medical officer, pardon me, and he was celebrating the contributions of public health nursing to establishing essential programs. For example, in a quote from a source in the BC Provincial Archives, one of the annual reports, he commented on Victorian Order nurse Jessie Forshaw, quote, "Miss Forshaw took charge of the work in Saanich, and it has grown until there are now 3 nurses engaged. A health centre has been opened as a temporary quarters, and we are raising $25,000 to build a permanent house," unquote. So again, roots in terms of establishing health services at a broader level while meeting the needs of individuals and families in the community, particularly around the prevention of illness and communicable disease at the time. So this slide is actually of Christina Tom, a public health nurse. She was a graduate of the first public health certificate course here at UBC, and she initiated a weekly clinic for well babies in Kamloops. And she also provided preventive services to school children and home visits to families. And here you see one of the clinics that she established in Kamloops. You can see that there is, of course, a physician in the background, but it was very much a nursing program and with autonomous nursing care. And by the way, at the time, she had an annual salary of $162 a year. So these public health certificate courses were established by the Red Cross, and in 3 universities, UBC, U of A, and actually it might have been just those 2. Sorry, I forget the third. I think there was one in the East. And that was in relation to the flu and to start to move to really recognize what public health nurses needed in terms of a breadth and depth of education to be able to practice in the community. Zillman Warbenuk identified the first public health nursing specialty roles, and we talk a lot about specialties today. It's very important conversation in nursing education. But the first 2 specialties were school health, nursing, and tuberculosis. And of course, again, the additional education that was required for those roles. And at the time, nursing worked with others, for example, NGOs, religious leaders, women's groups, to establish these courses and this essential education. So again, we recognize how our early practice that was inspired by the university was very broad in terms of the socio-political dimensions of health and the organization of health services. Delivery, yes. Point of care, yes, but also the big vision for what was needed and being able to establish services and programs. And I think that's an important message today. The other foundation that's quite important is that these services, as public health nursing services and community health more broadly became more established, they were universally accessible to people. So, the programs were universal. Today, we see a little bit more of a pulling back from universality, and public health nursing in particular is being provided to high priority populations. Important, yes, but we're losing some ground there in terms of connection. So also early on and through the past century, there was a lot of attention to the leadership that was required for public health nursing. For example, within the Canadian National Association of Trained Nurses, the precursor to the CNA, there was a special public health nursing section of that association. And there was an impressive presence of public health nursing writings and literature in the early Canadian Nurse Journal and also the Public Health Journal. Provincially, within BC, there was quite a network in terms of leadership. There were positions within the provincial government. And we had the appointment of Miss Heather Kirkpatrick, for example, as the first director of public health nursing in 1939 within government, another graduate of this program. And she devoted attention and resources to the autonomy and independence of public health nurses by establishing a council where they could come together once a year and really talk about directions and programs and what needed to change, and also to combat some of the isolation in the roles. For a long time, until I think the 90s, public health nursing leaders, so the leaders within the respective regions and units around the province, met once a year again to really look critically at programming and determine the directions going forward. And again, that has been lost with the move to programmatic structures in regions, in government. We've really lost the leadership for nursing. And it's quite, I think, I see a lot of nodding heads. Yeah, we're aware of what that means. More on that later. So just turning to a discussion of the knowledge, again, a strong vision for the appreciation of the breadth and depth required to prepare nurses for teaching and for public health and for administrative roles as well. And so the first curriculum really was a step up for so many women at the time for an education of this breadth and depth. And it was an area of advancement and became the opportunity for women to contribute to science as well. And I would argue that this has not been duly recognized or celebrated as we would hope within even feminist movements. But the first university nursing curriculum really, as you see here, was predicated on first 2 years of broad-based arts, humanities, sciences, history, math, economics, philosophy, biochemistry, physics, bacteriology, and a choice of either Latin or French. The second 2 years were spent in a hospital setting, and the final 5th year was back in the university with the choice of either pedagogy or public health nursing. So extremely rigorous, known at the time as the sandwich program. And here you can see the content within the public health stream, much of which we would identify today as critical as well. So very impressive, actually, in terms of the curriculum. However, there were the persistent tensions in the diversity of the role and knowledge requirements for professional nursing practice. And, these have been widely discussed by scholars such as Catherine McPherson, Margaret Skye, and others in terms of the gender and class divisions within the profession. Johns herself, in an address to the Canadian Nursing Association of Trained Nurses in July 1920, was published in the Canadian Nurse Journal, articulated the tensions between the requirements for highly knowledgeable and skilled nursing care and what she described as more routine nursing duties of care of people in the home provided by, at that time, private duty nurses. Quote, "Physicians and the public accuse us of educating nurses away from nursing and rendering them unwilling to perform ordinary nursing duties. I leave it up to you to say whether or not there is some truth in this accusation. They urge us to lower our standards, to give it shorter courses, to do something to get nursing attendance for people who need it." Other reports moving on over the ages contributed various policy perspectives on nursing education, but there was a growing consensus among these reports on the importance of the academic foundation. And actually, there's been a very good analysis in the States by Catherine Geeby on the reports on nursing education, policy reports over the years, the Flexner reports and all of those, and with a very sound analysis of what they meant and how they were or were not acted upon. So one of our landmark reports, of course, was Dr. George Weir, who was a professor of education here at UBC, and he was commissioned nationally to undertake the survey of nursing education in 1932. And really the underlying question was, does the nurse need to be educated? So it's really quite an impressive report to look at it. I looked at it again just recently. And of course, he affirmed the need for a university education for nurses, a high standard of education that was at that time to be decoupled from hospital service. He also questioned, interestingly, if two levels of nursing, practical and professional, would be confusing to the public, and suggested that the position was one that would not be taken up by other professions. And that was a quote from Weir in 1932. So the journey continued to establish academic education. Kathleen Ellis, of course, University of Toronto, initiated the first integrated baccalaureate degree, so moving away from the sandwich format. And the Hall report, there's Helen U. Salem, first spotlight on nursing education, did a survey of hospital schools of nursing across the Canada, and again affirmed that the position that we needed to move forward, that standards were not being met, that schools were being established in very, very tiny hospitals, which of course was a source of prestige for communities to have a nursing program, as it is today, and that was becoming a problem. So that was the thrust of her report. And then Emmett Hall also took up a review of nursing education in the 60s and recommended that at least 25% of nurses should have a degree preparation. He indicated a preference for degree preparation, but the other components of nursing education should be in established, fairly large hospitals, and preferably with a relationship with the university. So moving on to 1982, the Canadian Nurses Association, as you know, the landmark resolution that university preparation be the requirement for entry to practice by the year 2000. And that was passed with the rationale that the preparation was required for the complexity of nursing care in all roles and settings, which sparked great discussion and debate across the country, and I think to some extent still exists in our world today. But by 1989, all professional associations had signed on, except for Quebec. And then there was the flurry of collaborations to try to make this happen. So in 1988, I was a master's student here, and Dr. Willman, the director at the time, asked me if I would go to this collaborative forum held in the Marion Woodward Lecture on how to achieve entry to practice in BC, and if I would take the notes of the day in terms of what went on. And I was quite excited to be able to do that, and went. And the conference was chaired by Roberta Hewitt, joined by faculty members and graduate students, Jenny Sprouse, Dr. Margaret Campbell, Connie Canham, Cheryl Entwistle, Wendy Hall, Judith Mogan, Olive Simpson, and Sheila Stanton. Jessie Mantle, Dorothy Kurgan, and Sue Smith represented UVic. Joy Homewood represented the Nursing Education Council of British Columbia, and Roberta Hewitt also represented RNABC. And there were many, many people, nurses in attendance. The day offered keynotes on the essential elements of a baccalaureate program. Conceptual frameworks for curricula and practice were provided by Dr. Margaret Campbell. There was an exploration of the understanding of the mandates of community colleges and universities in a collaborative endeavor. And there was a presentation on NECBC's pink paper on possible scenarios for baccalaureate in the future. So there was very clearly 3 templates for how the collaboration could proceed. And the assembly came together, and there was a joining of forces of the university, the RNABC, NECBC, and actually the Nurse Administrators Association was present that day too, and they were in support of the collaborative endeavor to make entry to practice happen. So what was interesting about that is the joining of forces of those academic institutions, nursing organizations, and also within government there were allies. And so there was a strong connection to nursing and government. I recall some of the leaders at the time talking about Joanne Fort, for example, she was strategically placed in government. And we were able to move that forward. And it was 2 years after that when I completed my master's degree finally. I was hired by UVic jointly with Caribou College at the time to go to Kamloops and begin the journey to offer baccalaureate nursing education in the interior for the first time, along with colleagues at Okanagan College, Camosun College, and Malaspina College. And we all worked together to jointly with UVic develop that program and collaborate over a number of years before any of those institutions became degree granting in their own right. So that period of connection and collaboration and mentorship was absolutely critical in establishing a rigorous academic education in these other institutions. So today what we have is the Canadian Association Schools of Nursing, and of course there's lots of things that happen in the interim, but to look at our national nursing education framework today, it really is a comprehensive statement on the domains of nursing education, BSN to master's to PhD, and you can see that we've made great strides in conceptualizing what these graduate programs are, their connection to undergraduate programs, and research agendas. I'm sure you will agree that despite the vision and the advancements, we still face tensions in the delineation and acceptance of a university-level education for nurses. It still exists. I would argue that we're somewhat less vocal right now, for some reason, in advocating for the BSN, and instead we're engaging in dominant discourses of scope and scope of practice, harmonization of roles, and interprofessional practice. So these are important, but we really have to understand what's underlying some of these discourses. And I think we are facing a bit of a crisis of confidence in our leadership in affirming and projecting that vision of the BSN, what it means as the essential preparation for the critical mass of the nursing workforce. I don't have the answers as to why totally that's happening, but I'm sure that we can have discussion about that. So that brings us to the theme of leaders and inspiring leadership. And again, we can see how the early leaders of the day really did advocate for moving us forward to where we are today. And they did address tensions in the binary of what has become, and it still exists, ideals in education and ideals in practice. And John's deeply understood this, as we've talked about. She held the dual position of director of the VGH School of Nursing and the UBC Department of Nursing for a while, and of course has written about some of that tension that she experienced. She did not have a degree herself, and deeply regretted that. She valued it so deeply and was very humble in that she was hired as a director without a degree. But she was amazing. She was able to provide the leadership, of course, beyond what could ever be imagined. She was deeply connected to other leaders and nursing organizations in her advocacy, and that also increased her strength. And Zilman Warbenek referred to how an appreciation of just how advanced were the positions of these early nursing leaders comes from a review of Ethel John's presentations to various groups during 1916 to 1919, where she frequently and eloquently promoted the idea of university education for nurses. She herself referred to it being inspired by a year of study at Teachers College with scholars such as Lavinia Dock, Isabel Stewart, Adelaide Nutting, and others. Her connection, again, with other leaders, excuse me, and nursing associations, including CNA, are pictured on, some of those leaders are pictured here on this slide. Again, all of them had connections with this School of Nursing, and they made significant contributions to nursing education, the profession, and nursing's contribution to global health. Thanks. Thank you. Time for a pause. Thanks very much. So you see Helen Randall as one. She was, of course, the first registrar of the Graduate Nurses Association of BC, an active, very active provincially and nationally working to set up associations. And she also was behind the scenes working with administrators in the appointment of Ethel Johns in 1919. Helen Musalem, a baccalaureate graduate from the UBC School of Nursing. She carried out, as I mentioned earlier, the survey of hospital schools of nursing. Went on to hold leadership roles in the development and the operations of CNA and public health nationally and internationally. Lyle Creeman was a UBC graduate in the 30s, went on to practice as a public health nurse in northern British Columbia, rose to the highest ranks of global leadership as the Chief Nursing Officer for World Health Organization between 1954 and 68, another strong advocate for public health nursing. And prior to her international prominence, she had also held executive positions with the RNABC. She has a wonderful biography, Susan Armstrong Reed, recently published, and an excerpt from Creelman's diary from May 15th, 41. Quote, she writes, her introduction to RNABC proved a rather stormy introductory to the wrangling that could sidetrack productive nursing meetings, unquote. Some things were forever thus. Verna Huffman-Splain, Canada's first principal nursing officer, represented Canada within WHO, within the Government of Canada. She was a sessional faculty member in the UBC School of Nursing during the years that she was also on the ICN board from 1973 to 81. And she held this school, of course, in such high esteem. In 1912, she hosted a garden party here on the endowment lands in her lovely home in the honor of 100 years of a professional association in BC. It was the RNABC and then became the CRNBC, and at that time we were trying to get the ARNBC off the ground. So I can remember her standing there addressing the nurses in the room from across Canada, going with her cane from coast to coast to coast. And it was a lovely party to bring. She really believed how important it was to bring nurses together. So you can see this relationship between academic leaders, nursing organizational leaders, very important web of connections and relationships. And one can ask if this exists today, or is there in fact a schism in the views that we hold and how to advocate for education, professional practice, and the discipline moving forward. And we see today governments challenging us to adjust scopes of practice, harmonize our roles, bring the nursing family together. You don't hear a lot about upholding the breadth and depth of a BSN education for registered nurses. In fact, you don't hear a lot about registered nurses at all that I've been listening. So I think that we need to pay attention to what the discourse of the day is within government, and also how we are considering our advocacy work in relation to that discourse and that power that's being exercised within nursing. The government priorities of the day are LPNs, nurse practitioners, and care aides, and they're important, but there's also an insidious lack of attention to the registered nurse role in the system, other than for specialization. And the recent CIHI data from the Canadian Institutes of Health Information suggests that we have a decline in the number of registered nurses for the first time in many years, despite all of our hard work to educate more nurses and take more students and find clinical placements. So, turning back to public health nursing, what I would say is what's happening in nursing in general may be most important to reflect on what's happening to the public health nursing role. In fact, it might be the canary in the coal mine, I think. And I'm talking about public health nursing because it was the impetus for 100 years ago. And it's not the only important nursing role, but there's something important happening in public health that I think we need to pay attention to. I practiced as a public health nurse in the 80s on the east side of Vancouver. And at that time, it was a very rich practice with a continuity of relationship with families and within schools, a chance to sit on panels and boards with planners to talk about the health of the population. And that continuity of relationship was extremely rich. At the time, the school board, Vancouver School Board, paid part of our salary to the Vancouver Health Department so that we could spend time in elementary schools and be part of, a community. It was just such a rich practice. And then it started to go in the 90s. So right now, when you look at the literature and the research that's being done with public health nurses across the country, there are themes such as the rise of technically based, task-based programs, as opposed to continuity of relationship. There's a loss of meaningful public health nursing programs, such as universal home visiting and immunizations, increasingly being contracted out to pharmacies. Universal home visiting now is a telephone call. It is not a visit, except for high-priority families. And PHN contributions are not recognized in the discourses of the organizations where they work. Case in point, measles. As we are experiencing right now, a measles outbreak. Herd immunity within the population is low. The media reports have focused on this, the loss of herd immunity. They've cited the vaccine hesitancy as the root cause amidst multiple reports with medical historians, public health physicians, pharmacists. I have not yet, and maybe you have, but I have not heard one word from a nursing organization, and I have not seen a nurse interviewed anywhere about this. And yet, since the 40s, immunization was a nursing program, autonomously and administered by nurses. So this is certainly something that there's something going on here that's quite significant. And I think vaccine hesitancy in itself is listed as one of the top 10 health priorities and problems within the World Health Organization worldwide. Any of us who practice public health nursing know that the way to work with vaccine hesitancy is to have a relationship with the population, a trusted relationship. You hear the media reports, and they're counseling families to go and talk to their family physician or their pharmacist if they're concerned. It's been quite striking. Where is CNA? Where are our professional nursing associations? They should have been front and center in this, drawing attention to that importance of that relationship between public health nurses and their communities. It's an opportunity. It still exists. So I think it's easy, though, and Gertrude and I had this conversation, for us to spiral down into the gloom and doom, and it's government's fault, and we've lost everything, and it's all been taken from us, and we do that. We go there. But I think it's also very much a chance for us to come together and think about knowledge and research and directions of programs and leadership to make that happen. One of the really astonishing issues is what nursing itself, what nursing itself is doing with this whole policy of a nurse is a nurse is a nurse. And someone who is in, for example, 16 years in one setting can just move overnight into public health. And the nursing, I was at a forum of the BC nurses on the long weekend in November, and they were talking about how astonishing it is that completely unqualified nurses are coming into public health, and they've never worked there, and they're just moving right into the positions, I believe enabled by the BCNU contract, and that is becoming even stronger, this notion of a nurse is a nurse is a nurse. So take, for example, what you have before you is the recent job description for a primary health care nurse within Northern Health. And these are the education training requirements. And now if you read the job description itself, it is broad-based, it is public health, it is harm reduction, it is chronic illness and wound care, it is population health and public health principles. It is establishing programs. What is striking about this job description, and this is what is happening in the North, is that primary health care nurse, this generic entity, and public health nurses are being moved into these positions. What is striking is in the most recent posting, there is no requirement for a degree. And actually, people are quite proud of that. And I had one nurse say to me that, why would you need to say that they require a degree when almost every, registered nurse has a degree? And I said, well, what discipline would ever take their educational requirement out of a job description. And, and there's also a registered psychiatric nurse, as you can see, can move into this role. Not all registered psychiatric nurses have degrees. So it's quite astonishing, and we have to find a voice to articulate why this is happening. So, it's not all gloom and doom. Turning to the inspiration, and where we have been consistent, I think, over the years, is a vision for primary health care. Our nursing associations, our educational programs, we've all taken inspiration from primary health care since Alma Ata, rooted primarily in social justice, affirming nursing's role in universal programs and accessibility to populations. And I think this still is a guiding philosophy and set of values for us. And it is important for us to think about that and to think about our programs in relation to primary health care. The ICN at the moment, I think, is quite strong in launching with World Health Organization the Nursing Now campaign, inviting nurses to really come forward and with power on important advocacy initiatives that will make a difference in countries and around the world, and in particular to really look at advocacy for what people need in the 21st century. And so the challenge is for every country to launch a campaign geared towards what's happening for health for the people and how nursing uniquely can address that. The last I checked, I don't think Canada has a campaign yet, a national campaign. So here's an opportunity. There is one?
It's coming.
Yay, from the 100-year-old school. How fitting. That's wonderful news. So it's the message is that it's time to project a vision for sure. And I just read Lynn Nagel's, the editor of Nursing Leadership. The last issue was devoted to nursing leadership, just what's the current issue. And her quote struck me, and I'll quote, "Will new theories emerge to inform the design of leadership programs to contend with issues as yet unknown? Contemplating the emergence and most certain prominence of artificial and augmented intelligence, robotics, data science, and practice-based evidence leads one to speculate that leadership styles and skills will need to be reconsidered. What, for example, might supplement the notion of emotional intelligence in the face of dealing with non-sentient entities? How will leaders provide oversight of a workforce that blends humans and robots, primarily delivers remote and virtual care that is predicated on the provision of a just-in-time skill and professional mix?" So considering some of the forces and opportunities in population health, climate change, threatened food securities, the future of democracy and work, the projection that probably over 50% of the population will not have work in the future due to automation, the introduction of technology and precision medicine as we speak that is very expensive and will not be available to all. There is an emerging awareness of health equity and how central that will be to the practice of nurses, as well as relational ethics, critical perspectives, system oversight, and the ability to interact with technology in a way that technology is not dominant over nursing. So there are many education and nursing priorities that, of course, demands a university preparation and is taxing all of us in nursing education at the moment to interact with our curricula. Another source of inspiration, I think, for the future and as a current challenge today in nursing is to look at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and our TRC calls to action. There's so much opportunity in our calls to action to reflect, to learn from Indigenous peoples, and to really refresh what we understand, and our directions for health and healing, social justice. So I think this is just a tremendous energy and support that we're starting to really feel in our work with Indigenous people in nursing education. Just a little plug for the past. And I have a lot of nodding, and I know Heather Clark's in the room and a few others from the golden days back in the day of the 1990s. Remember, New Directions for Healthcare, and our professional association was a leader. I think the government adopted the title New Directions for Healthcare after RNABC did, and wrote all those wonderful position papers on primary health care and health promotion. There was the Nursing Center in Comox, which was a demonstration of nurses in primary care for people with chronic illness and others. And lots of good research went on there. So, we have to really think about where's that voice today? We're seeing a weakening of our nursing organizations at all levels as they're moving to voluntary models. They're not going to be well-resourced. We're already seeing that within CNA. And the collective voice here in British Columbia is not present at the moment to the extent that we need. So that really leads to a bit of a consideration of how we enact our social accountability. And it bears some very strategic thinking. And perhaps that could become a Nursing Now campaign in itself. So history does inspire us, I think, to look at collectivity as it has been actualized and how nurses have worked in the past. Historian Diane Hamilton referred to Lavinia Dock, Lillian Wald, Annie Goodrich, the Henry Street nurses, as a thought collective. They had a vision of nursing as a sisterhood with a core value of compassionate care, of humanity, without the self-sacrifice demanded by religion. The terms humanity, progress, fellowship, civic righteousness, unfailing goodness, and ethics, language distinctive of the era, supported the view that the spirit of nursing was compassion. And they came together around these ideas to move forward with various programs. So we might ask, where is nursing's thought collective today? And how can it be inspired within the profession and the discipline? So I think the answer, of course, for today is with our students and our graduates. They represent what nursing is, and they are demanding a voice. They're wondering where it is, and they're not going to stay if they don't have it. They know how to organize. For example, within the Canadian Nursing Association, Canadian Nursing Students Association, some of their conferences are amazing. They're around advocacy, political influence, cultural safety, indigeneity, nursing in the digital age, racism. They're on top of issues, and they can become quite active, as they did in the case of the introduction of the NCLEX-RN exam, and demanding answers and action on that initiative. Interesting reflection, in 1965, Ethel Johns wrote a letter to Dr. Marion U. Pritchard, who later became the director of the school between 1971 and 77. And in the letter, Johns was reflecting on the students and the heavy responsibilities, quote, heavy responsibilities thrust upon them in 1919 and in those early days. And she said, all I could do was get on with the job, and perhaps the students themselves would find a most excellent way, and they did. And I think that Johns would be very inspired by our students and graduates of today, a positive outcome of the experiment. So, just in closing, if we were to reflect on some of how Ethel Johns might challenge us from today's standpoint, and I take liberty with imposing my own lens on this reflection, but I believe she would not back down. She would be tenacious in the conversation and the critique about the state of the nursing profession, and she would unequivocally challenge the loss of an influential collective voice of the nursing profession. She would ask, who is speaking for nursing? The motivation of our leaders. and to reflect on how we are addressing tensions between the big picture of what society needs and will continue to need from nursing and what employers want now. She would challenge us to revisit, and affirm the relational aspects of nursing in all settings and roles. She would call us to action to not merely enact the status quo, and she would be most concerned about the state of public health nursing and losses incurred in other areas of practice. She would be provocative and influential in her challenge to the policies within nursing and without, perpetuated by unions and others, that a nurse is a nurse is a nurse, without due consideration of knowledge and competencies. She would be eloquent in her communications and bring focus and rigor to the imperative of an academic education in her writings, and she was an amazing writer, as you know, and her dealings with government. She would be appalled at the state of the Canadian Nurse Journal and the loss of academic rigor. The journal has been in hiatus since May, June 2018, and it is abandoning the acceptance of academic peer-reviewed manuscripts. So we await to see what the electronic version of the journal will bring. She would be most inspired by the opportunity to respect and learn from Indigenous knowledge systems as a foundation for health and healing, and the opportunity for cultural humility within our profession. And a reflection, of course, that when Johns worked for the Rockefeller Foundation, she completed incredible research on the plight of Black nurses within nursing, a report that was never acted upon. She would unequivocally affirm the vision for university entry-level education at BSN level. She would ask us, I think, about the directions of advanced nursing practice today. Are they founded in medical or nursing models? She would call for an inquiry and make recommendations for a comprehensive nursing strategy that does not merely comply with government directives of the day, but to establish a progressive and indisputable future. She would observe that nursing must project its destiny and contributions with as much conviction and force as it did in 1919. She would proudly affirm the UBC School of Nursing's outstanding contributions over the past century to knowledge development, conceptual models, educational advancements, leadership in developing research programs and methodologies within feminist, colonial, post-colonial, and critical perspectives. Over the years, the UBC nursing graduates have made a profound difference in the quality and the leadership in nursing education, practice, and research in all areas of nursing practice and roles. So the findings of this first century of the experiment indicate that the university nursing education should continue with strength and vision, with a bit of course connection. She would be powerful and skillful in using all of her communications in moving us forward and challenging the invisibility of nurses in current government discourses. And she would ask us, as she did in the closing of the Cradle to Grave speech in 1919, now what are you nurses going to do about it? So I thank you for the privilege of addressing you today in this amazing School of Nursing, this beautiful place, and celebrating the accomplishments. And I leave you with some questions that Johns may put before you, and open for some discussion. I'd love to hear your views. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's on now, and this is for the people in the webcast. We have a whole group that you can't see, but they're still here. And so we open now the floor for discussion. And I saw a person in the back standing up.
I'm just a little bit nervous, but just bear with me. I am a very proud graduate of UBC, twice. And I also carry with me a very proud background from a traditional School of Nursing model, hospital trained. And I'm also working in nursing education, and what I see are
Thank you. So the question is, what are we going to do about wait lists? And Susan, what would be your sense?
Do I have to answer all these questions? Well, I think we have to consider capacity. I think we have to capacity in a number of areas. Educators, for one, practice placements for another. Another consideration is we're producing more and more nursing graduates, but their majority are working casual. So it's a complex picture in terms of how do we build capacity to educate more nurses and do it in the way that we know we must, so high quality nursing education. I don't have the answer to what our capacity is or should be at the moment. In terms of increasing numbers of registered nurses. I think most of us would say we're pretty well at capacity right now in terms of practice placement opportunities. As we envision them, that's a critical step. And so, but then I think, really, once we sort out capacity issues, it's a matter of really, again, making strong case to government and strong leadership in government around society's need for nurses and how we're going to, the plan for going forward. We need a strategic plan as to numbers, how we're educating, who we're working with, how we are establishing new models of care to educate students within. Sorry, that's, others may have some good ideas here.
Hi, Susan, it's Herpel. I guess my question for you, in listening to the history of nursing over the last 100 years in the country, has been what, in your view, has happened to the influence that nursing hasn't had at the national level? What's happened, I guess, is my question, nationally, that we're not where, we don't have the seat at the table that we used to have? What are some of the underlying issues there, in your view?
That's a really important question, Herpel. I think there are a number of dynamics from within government, moves to more generic health programmatic structures. We lost nursing leaders who were responsible for nursing programs, and nurses became leaders of everything, but in some cases, but a large span of administration. And then, so that's one area, I think, where we really lost ground. And there was an influential report in early 2000, a national report was commissioned by Health Canada. It was done outside of nursing, but one of the important recommendations was that nurses needed to be in leadership positions for nursing, not for everything but nursing, but for nursing. We're the greatest, and that was never enacted. And so we're where we are in terms of health system structures. But then there's the issue of the nursing associations. And what's happened is, certainly in this province, we lost our association and all its resources, all but a few resources, to the regulatory function and to a college with an increasingly narrow mandate. So, and that's happening here, but it's also happening nationally. And it's something we better pay close attention to, because that was the voice of the collective to come together. We do have the union, and there's power there, but we've lost the professional association and what it stood for. We're trying to rebuild. We're still trying to rebuild, but what's going to happen is going to be voluntary resources.
do it as follows. We take 2 more questions, that's you and you. And then we have lots of opportunity to continue the conversation while we get ourselves a coffee. And the theme, the important theme that Susan brought up as to where do we want to move and how do we want to move forward is going to be the question of the day, and will also be continued to be addressed while we have the panel. So just a little bit of organization that I put in here. Otherwise, we miss our coffee, and that cannot happen. But please go ahead. You had a question?
My question's just about, like, I'm a graduate student, but I'm also still a full-time staff nurse. And for the last 2 days, I was at a union event, and I'm like, I guess I'm just curious about how, like, there's this fracture right now between the union and the association and the college and the messaging from the union. Like, it's not collaborative, and I gather that looking at the history of nursing in BC over time, it's become less collaborative. So, like, I'm just wondering, well, like, where do we go and how do you get power back with the association when you have this other nursing organization that's not willing to share power, like not willing to collaborate for the common goal?
That's the question of the day. And again, I think taking inspiration from some of our forerunners, our ancestors, it's all about relationships and ability to put ego aside. And it's about leadership, coming together in different ways. And organizations can evolve and change with leadership. But I look forward to thoughts of others on that. It's also history. I mean, history shaped those relationships, those interorganizational relationships that maybe there was a grudge years ago and, you know, we didn't move on. So there are some important leadership implications, but we have to figure it out. Some countries have unions and regulators, and that's it. And it's interesting to note what form, how the professional association function is expressed within those kinds of countries. I don't know the answer to that, but it's something to think about.
Thanks so much, Susan.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi. I'm just so grateful for what you've talked about today, and I think it takes a lot of courage to talk about a lot of the truths that you've brought forward, so I want to commend you for that. And I had very high expectations for this, and you just blew me out of the water, so I'm very grateful. Speaking of my truth right now, that I feel like I'm baffled every day, paying very close attention to the politics in the province and nationally, but just looking at our own province for a second. I recently read one of your papers and the one slide with RNABC and all of the hopes and dreams and work that has gone into that. And the nurses who have bought this RNBC building, the funds, like all of these different things, the erosion of the nursing secretariat in the province. David Byers taking this up and being solo and his portfolio growing by the second and no longer just focusing on nursing. So all of these erosions that you're speaking of and then some. And I think my biggest question that I'm perplexed with currently is I'm expecting like every day for nursing to like rally the troops, storm the gates with the torches and the pitchforks, to question what is happening with our leadership. Like we have 3 nursing organizations in the province with no nursing executive directors or CEOs right now. I don't understand. But what I don't understand is why nursing isn't shocked and alarmed by this and creating serious, critical, urgent action around this. And so, Joy Peacock identified that once to me as, the pervasive apathy in the province. And so I'm just wondering, one, what about that apathy? What's that about? And then how do we rally the troops? Thanks.
Thank you, Dawn. And you've provided amazing leadership for nursing. And you're an inspiration. Thank you for that.
Thank you all. And I think my bottom line comment is that we have raised more questions than answers, and that is what university education is about. So lots of discussion, and take a break, and then we gather again at just 11:40 or